Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in their Week 13 matchup played December 6, 2015. We're going to go over every possession and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis as these two NFC South Division rivals went at it with a wild card berth on the line as these two teams are fighting for a wild card spot, fighting for their playoff lives as we're coming down the stretch in this season, as there's just 5 weeks left, 4 games after today. But let's start off with the first possession, and the Bucks would end up punting after 7 plays. The Falcons would do the same, as they also would punt after 7 plays on their first possession. And so now Tampa Bay would take over on their own 23-yard line midway through the first, with 7.5 still left to play in the first quarter. And they would end up marching down the field. Jameis Winston leading them down the field in about 6.5 minutes, going 77 yards. And he would do that on 13 plays, and he would cap it off with a 5-yard touchdown run for the score. Connor Barth added the extra point, and it was 7-0 Buccaneers as the rookie Jameis Winston scored on that 5-yard touchdown run. So now that would do it for the first. That was with about a minute left in the first, and the Falcons would bring the first quarter to a close, and it was 7-0 Bucks. But the Falcons picked up the second quarter, still driving. They converted on a third down, and they had brought the ball up towards midfield and into Tampa Bay territory. They got down into the red zone, all the way down to the 5-yard line. But on 3rd and goal, Willie Golston sacked Matt Ryan, and so out would come the field goal unit as Shane Graham attempted a 28-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and the Falcons were on the board as they cut the Bucks lead to 4 with the score Buccaneers 7, Falcons 3, with about 9.5 minutes still left to play before halftime. So now the Buccaneers would end up punting after 8 plays on their next possession, and then the Falcons would take over with less than 5 minutes left to play in the second quarter, and the ball on their own 8-yard line, backed up against their own end zone, but they would convert on a big 3rd and 11 from the 7 when Ryan hit Hardy for a 23-yard reception to bring the ball out to the 30. And then on a first down from the Atlanta 45, Matt Ryan went to Julio Jones for an 18-yard reception that brought the ball to the 37, but he was sacked on the next play by Quan Alexander. He forced the fumble, but it was recovered by Tevin Coleman. And so that brought the game to the 2-minute warning, and now the Falcons would be faced with a 2nd and 23, and Freeman would pick up 12 yards on a reception, and then DeMarco picked up 9 yards on a reception. But on 4th and 2, out came Shane Graham to attempt a 47-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now a 1-point game with the score 7-6 with just over a minute left before halftime, and the Bucks still in the lead. So now the Bucks would get the ball on their own 20 after the kickoff, and they picked up a first down with a 15-yard reception by Mike Evans on 2nd and 2 from the 28 that brought the ball to the 43. But then with just over half a minute left before halftime, Jameis Winston was intercepted by Trufant, and so now the Falcons would take over at midfield on their own 49 with just over half a minute left to play. They still had all of their timeouts, and so they would work their timeouts, and they would get to the 34, and with no time left, Shane Graham kicked a 52-yard field goal, and now the Falcons took the 2-point lead going into halftime with the score Atlanta 9, Tampa Bay 7. So the interception there at the end ended up costing the Bucks, as now the Falcons were in the lead, and they would get the ball first in the second half. And they started off with a big play on their first play of the second half, as Matt Ryan hit Julio Jones for a 25-yard reception and brought the ball to midfield at the 49. But their drive would end up stalling in the red zone. They got all the way to the 9-yard line, but they would end up they'd lose a couple yards, and they ended up having to settle for a 29-yard field goal by Shane Graham, and that made it 12-7 as the Falcons extended their lead to 5 with about 8.5 minutes left still in the third. But the Bucks came right back. They responded on their first possession of the second half. Jameis Winston would drive them down the field. They started off on their own 18-yard line, but he ended up moving them into the Falcons' territory. He had a big play on 2nd and 13 from the 26 when he hit Vincent Jackson for a 29-yard reception that brought the ball to the Atlanta 45. And then Sims ran 25 yards to the red zone to the Atlanta 20. And then on 3rd and 1 from the 11, Sims picked up 10 yards to bring it up to the 1-yard line, 1st and goal. And Doug Martin, the muscle hamster, punched it in for the 1-yard touchdown. They went for the 2-point conversion, but they did not get it. And so now they were in the lead by 1 with the score Tampa Bay 13, Atlanta 12. So now the Bucks defense would come up big with a 3-and-out as they forced the Falcons to punt on their next possession. And now the Bucks would take over on the Atlanta 34 after getting a 28-yard return by Bobby Rainey on the punt. So Bobby Rainey sets him up right there in basically field goal range. And then a face mask after a run by Martin of 7 yards would make it a first down on the Atlanta 13 as they were right there in the red zone. And then another penalty against Atlanta as they were shooting themselves in the foot would make it 1st and goal on the 6. But the Falcons defense, after committing those penalties, would clamp down, and they would force the Bucks to have to settle for a 23-yard field goal as Connor Barth kicked it through the uprights to extend the Bucks lead to 4 with the score 16-12, Tampa Bay over Atlanta with less than a minute and a half left in the third. So now the Falcons would bring the third quarter to a close, and they went 3-and-out as they would open up the fourth quarter by punting the ball back to the Bucks. So the Bucks would take over, and they had it on their own 36. Jameis Winston hit Mike Evans for a 16-yard reception to bring the ball into Atlanta territory at the 48. But then Doug Martin, the muscle hamster, fumbled the ball. Worlow forced the fumble. It was recovered by Allen. And so now the Falcons would take over on their own 45 with just over 14 minutes still left to play as they were down by 4. And they would continue to move the ball. They got down all the way to the 5-yard line, and Matt Ryan hit Nick Williams for a 5-yard touchdown. Graham added the extra point, and now the Falcons were in the lead 19-16. So the Falcons up by 3 with just less than 11 minutes left to play in this game. The Falcons defense would come up big on the next possession for the Bucks as they forced them to go 3-and-out and punt the ball, but the Bucks defense came up with a big stop as well as they forced the Falcons to punt after 5 plays on the possession that followed. And so now the Bucks would get the ball back down by 3 with less than 7 minutes left to play. They had the ball on their own 20 after the punt, and Jameis Winston would move them down the field. On a 2nd and 9 from the 21, Winston hit Jackson for a 22-yard reception that made a first down at the 43. Then on a 2nd and 4 from the 49, Winston, initially it was called an interception by Worlow, but it was a pass interference play against Trufant, and instead it would be a first down at the Atlanta 46 for the Bucks. Then on 2nd and 6 from the 42, Winston hit Austin Seraphin-Jenkins for an 8-yard reception, a first down at the 34. But then a holding penalty moved them back to the Atlanta 44. And then Winston went to Humphries. He picked up 6 yards. And then on 2nd and 14, he was sacked by Jarrett. And so now they were faced with a 3rd and 19 from the Atlanta 43. It looked like all was done, but Jameis Winston scrambles 20 yards for the first down. And now it's a first down at the Atlanta 23. Doug Martin would run 11 yards and bring this game to the 2-minute warning with the ball now on the 12-yard line. A first down in the red zone for the Buccaneers. And so now the Falcons would start to use their timeouts as Martin ran for 2 yards and they called the timeout. Martin would then run for 4 yards. The Falcons took their second timeout. So now it's 3rd and 4 on the Atlanta 6. And Jameis Winston hits Mike Evans for the 6-yard touchdown. And so then Barth added the extra point, and it was now 23-19 as Jameis Winston throws the go-ahead touchdown with just over a minute and a half left to play in this game. So now after the kickoff, the Falcons would take over on their own 20 on their first play on this possession. Matt Ryan drops back, and Lavonte David comes up with the interception. And that all but seals the deal, as all that was left to do was for Jameis Winston to take 3 knees in the victory formation as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers come from behind with a fourth quarter comeback led by Jameis Winston as they win this one 23-19. The Bucks now 6-6 on the season. They are now tied with the Falcons for second place in the South. Of course, the Panthers entered the day 11-0, but both teams playing for a playoff berth, playing for that wild card position, and the Bucks coming up with a huge victory. They're now 3-3 at home. The Falcons 3-3 on the road. Both teams 500 on the season. As I said, a big win for the Bucks. And they did it with both sides of the ball coming up huge in this game, especially down the stretch. Jameis Winston coming up huge, of course, with that 20-yard run on 3rd and 19 to keep that drive alive, and then throwing the touchdown pass to Mike Evans with less than 2 minutes left to play to go ahead. And, of course, Lavonte David coming up super clutch with that interception that really put the nails in the coffin as the Buccaneers get a huge win at home in Raymond James Stadium. And Jameis Winston in this game, 18 for 27, 227 pass yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He also had 5 carries for 15 yards and a rushing touchdown. So 2 total touchdowns for Jameis Winston. And Vincent Jackson, 3 receptions for 87 yards. Mike Evans, 5 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown. Austin Seraphim-Jenkins, 3 receptions for 31 yards. And Charles Sims ended up with 7 carries for 56 yards. He also had 2 receptions for 21 yards, as he ended up with 77 total yards in this game. Of course, Doug Martin had a catch for 5 yards, which gave him 100 total yards in the game, as he had 25 carries for 95 yards and a touchdown. And for the Falcons, Matt Ryan, 30 for 45, 269 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And Devonta Freeman, 14 carries for 47 yards. He also had 10 receptions for 56 yards, which gave him 103 total yards on the game. Tevin Coleman, 3 carries for 13 yards. He also had 1 reception for 4 yards, so 17 total yards in the game. Julio Jones, 8 receptions for 93 yards. And we look at the kickers in this game. And Connor Barth, perfect in the game, 1 for 1 on the field goals, 2 for 2 on the extra points. Shane Graham also perfect, 4 for 4 on the field goals, 1 for 1 on the extra points. And on defense, Quan Alexander with a sack, 2 sacks for Willie Golston, and Lavonte David had that interception there at the end. Quan Alexander also had a forced fumble. And for the Falcons, Werlo had a forced fumble, Jarrett had a sack, and Trufant had an interception. We look at the team stats, 25 first downs for the Bucks, 21 first downs for the Falcons. On 3rd down, the Falcons 8 of 16, 50% on 3rd down, but the Bucks 6 of 11, 54% conversion rate on 3rd down. And then we look at the total net yards, 388 for Tampa Bay, 319 for Atlanta. And on the ground, the Bucks 166 netted on the ground, just 64 yards netted for the Falcons. That's 102 more net rushing yards for Tampa Bay. And through the air, 255 netted for the Falcons. Matt Ryan sacked 3 times, losing 14 yards. And for the Buccaneers, 222 netted. Winston sacked just once, losing 5 yards. We look at the penalty yards in this game, 8 penalties against the Bucks, 7 penalties against the Falcons, but the Falcons with 58 penalty yards versus 53 for the Buccaneers. So 1 more penalty, but 5 less penalty yards against the Bucks. And the Bucks had 1 fumble they lost. The Falcons fumbled once, but they recovered their own fumble. And we look at the red zone. The Buccaneers 3 for 4, 75% in the red zone. The Falcons just 1 for 3, just 33% in the red zone, as they had to keep selling for field goals in this game, and that would end up being the difference, as the Buccaneers playing exceptionally well, the bend but don't break defense. And then the time of possession, 31 minutes, 15 seconds for Tampa Bay, 28 minutes, 45 seconds for the Falcons. And that was the thing, the Falcons, they had that stretch there where Shane Graham had 4 field goals without the Bucks scoring. The 3 field goals there in the second quarter, and then of course that field goal that opened up the second half. But then the Bucks coming right back, they get that touchdown of that long drive, and then the field goal, and then in the end, after losing the lead once again, after having taken it back, they come back from behind, and that huge 80-yard drive, eating up the last 5 minutes of the game, and scoring with just over a minute and a half left, and then the interception by David coming up very clutch for the Buccaneers, as the Buccaneers are really firing on all cylinders. And the Falcons, after the strong start, they just keep slipping, and they just, you wonder, are they ever going to be able to play like they were in the beginning of the season, as they've really fallen off a cliff. But the Buccaneers, they're red hot at the right time of year. They continue to play the way they're playing, then they will be on their way to the playoffs after having a rocky start. But the Buccaneers, like I said, they're coming together, and they're getting it done on both facets, both sides of the ball, and also on offense with the running and with the passing. As you saw, a big performance by Doug Martin in this game. And of course, Jameis Winston coming up clutch, getting it done when they needed him the most. Like I said, that 20-yard run on 3rd and 19 was huge. Of course, he had that rushing touchdown earlier in the game, and then to bookend it as well, getting that passing touchdown to Mike Evans was huge. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.